We'll call the meeting to order at 6:46. Drew, you got a invocation, please?
Father God, as always, we're so grateful to be in your presence. Father God, we ask that you give us wisdom to know what to do for our communities and surrounding areas. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.
Amen. Flag salute.
Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Odin Gruby,
Here.
Kevin Keener,
Here.
Drew Jackson,
Here.
Clint Horner,
Here.
Shane Knight,
Here.
Whitney Kerr, Ron Boyer,
Yep.
Brandon Wall.
First item of business is consent item 1A. Consider approval of our regular meeting minutes from June 1, 2021. Do we have a motion?
We have minutes.
We got minutes. We came in and moved the agenda, yeah.
I move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Call for a vote, please. Item 1B, discussion, consideration, and possible action on amending the 2021 calendar. I think this goes in. Ms. O'Neill, I'll let you speak to that.
So this is, just like we did at the Municipal Planning Commission, is changing the times with the municipal and regional planning commissions to allow for the regional planning commission to start at 5:30 and the municipal planning commission to start at 6.
I make a motion to approve. Second.
Motion and a second. Call for a vote, please. It pops up. Item 2, we don't have any removed items, so order of business. Item 3, discussion, consideration, and possible action on proposed regional planning commission ordinance. Mrs. O'Neill.
Lots of ordinances tonight. So we've been working on this for a little while. On the meetings that we'd have it, we wouldn't have a meeting because of planning commission. So wanted to make sure we brought it back to revisit and see where you guys stood on it. Made some changes to what was requested. I don't even remember when it was now, but so one of the requests was to add in some detailed or further information about roads, drainage, things like that. That was really one of the things that you all wanted to make sure that was covered. So we just kind of took some of the ordinances out of the city ordinances, amended them to where they kind of molded with what could be covered with regional. Be happy to answer any questions. If there's any comments, concerns, would like to at least try to keep this moving forward and get feedback or approval.
I've got mine kind of go through if anybody has anything, feel free to bring it up. Now, mine goes to page, let's see which in our packet here. Let me see which one it is. It's page 8. Unless I've overlooked it, as we renumbered some of these items coming in, 1, 2, 3, and then we get to 4, and then I think we go to 6. I don't know if that matters or if that has any.
Switch to page 8 of the packet. Is it this first?
packet, packet
Yeah,
page
PDF
eight.
page 8.
And the PDF, I think it says the same thing. On the bottom of mine, it says 8 of 21. I may have them backwards too, though. I don't,
That looks like it's just a Scrivener's error of skipping a number essentially.
okay, I didn't know if it had any bearing on anything.
No, it's something we could just do a change of, you know.
That's the page he's talking about, yes.
Yeah, that's the page. Correct, yeah. Yeah, just the numbering on
Yep.
that one. And I did have to read through number 4 for that, for areas of rural land, 10 acres. This is just a comment, or larger served. I had to read through that a few times to, as long as everybody's okay with that one. Then I won't. Over to page 14. That's gonna be towards the bottom, that section 1.6 for drainage. It talks about regulation, standards, design. I'm gonna go down a few sentences. To prevent the encroachment of buildings and improvements on natural drainage channels. And this is a portion I have a question about. It says to equitably apportion the cost of improvements. So I'm in that drainage portion. I don't know what that means or how that could be done. So who are we equitably apportioning these cost of improvements to? It talks about streams, natural drainage channels,
Right.
you know, all these things. I just didn't know how that would be.
That's a good question. I'm not real sure where that,
Who decide, yeah, that was my question. Who decides what's equitable? and
right,
who-
right. That's something that could be removed if, or amended, or however.
I know a little later in the document, it talks about developers specifically are required to do certain things. And I just didn't know in this one if it spelled out who was required to do it.
I don't believe on this specific one, it has that spelled out.
So that,
Yeah, that's something I said we could either amend it or we could just omit it.
and below that one, as it, under the same section as drainage, we get to paragraph C. And the second sentence, talking about drainage, it's intended that by these regulations that the improvement of the primary drainage channel shall be primarily the responsibility of the community as a whole, since the whole community materially has benefited. And then it talks about so I didn't know how that's gonna be managed, those costs. Then it says, however, the developer of the land containing the primary channel is expected to lay out, design, and otherwise plan and carry out his or her improvements in the manner that will not interfere, restrict natural flow of water, or materially change the condition of runoff, increase runoff, changes in primary channels which are created by improvements in the individual subdivision. Let's see, I read through something wrong there. Shall be the responsibility. So some of those have it as a responsibility as developer, and just that first portion kind of goes back to the other question of saying the community should bear the cost of it, and just didn't know how that would work. And again, if it's no issue, then I don't want to make an issue out of something that's not.
Right. And make sure you guys are speaking into the mics.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Ron, make sure you're speaking to the mic, because otherwise people that's listening on.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a button.
Anyway, anytime you've got something that's referring to the sharing of it at a community development or something like that, you've got to define it, because they're gonna look for that option.
Any thoughts on those?
We can handle however you guys would like to handle it. I mean, we can either throw in a definition in there, we can omit it. If, Tom, do you have an opinion on which one we do?
I don't know, I mean, I don't know that it adds a lot to keep it in there, but if it's going to stay,
Right,
I
it
mean,
needs to be
it says
defined.
shared by the community or, primarily the responsibility of the community as a whole. I don't know what that means. If that's a public entity or a conglomeration of private entities, what the community as a whole is, so, certainly use the word, maybe some elimination.
When I read that originally, I think I understood what it meant, but now that you've raised the point, I agree with what Kevin is saying, that maybe we reword that particular, you know, because we're talking about a major channel being something that serves more than 1,000 acres. So my reading in that was that if there's a particular development that's 100 acres out of that 1,000 that affects that primary channel, then whoever's developing that 100 acres should be the one to improve or maintain that channel. But
Is this
But-
talking
but it
about a
doesn't-
planned community, maybe?
no,
I mean, when
but
you
it-
talk 1,000 acres, it's not gonna be a real live subdivision, not in our area.
I'm not talking about a single subdivision. I'm talking about a primary drainage channel that serves over 1,000 acres. But to Kevin's point, I think it's right that maybe we do need to define that a little more, that if a developer of a particular piece of property affects that major drainage channel, they would be the ones responsible to maintain it or improve it, versus the community. I think the community word there is probably the big question mark. Because that kind of could be interpreted as, well, everybody that touches that channel needs to be responsible for helping him improve it, him or her, whatever.
Right.
The community sounds more like the beneficiary rather than the responsible party for the improvement of it.
Yes.
Shane, the primary channel is referring to what?
Drainage channel.
Is that like a creek, a river, or what?
Primary channels serve a drainage area of 1,000 acres or more.
So it's something that's passing water through it.
Yeah. And doesn't necessarily have to be a creek, but it just could be some natural swell that,
Because we've also got requirements in the area for blue line control, which is under the control of the Corps.
say that one more time.
The blue line rivers are all under control of the Corps.
Correct.
So primary channels, does it reach to that elevation, or is it something smaller than that?
Yeah, I would think this would be different than a river. But yes, I understand what you're saying. It doesn't define that. I just wonder if it might, I mean, I'm gonna throw out an idea here. That we modify that sentence to say, is it intended by these regulations that the improvement of the primary drainage channels shall be primarily shall be the responsibility of the developer for that particular portion of the development? That's obviously a terrible wording, but do you understand what I'm trying to say?
I do, and the only thing that I would say to that, and then I'll let you guys discuss that amongst yourselves as well, is we could have the potential where we have one subdivision come in, okay, they're responsible for their drainage, but then we have another one come in that's responsible for their drainage. I could just see there being some potential issues of if they don't, or if they don't quite meet, like, they go to the bare minimum standards of what that is, but another development goes above and beyond. You see what I'm saying? Where it could cause some issues down the road as far as flooding or anything like that. Now, I might be wrong, I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah, I mean, they wouldn't be allowed to discharge water any faster than it was in previously.
Right, if there's something approved saying to that
Yes, on an
matter. Yes,
improvement.
you're exactly
on-
right, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
What about the impeding or changing of the flow
Well,
itself?
that's kind of what was going through my mind. If there's
Okay.
some way that you
'Cause
impede the flow of this natural drainage channel,
You
it's your
could have
responsibility
someone
to
ahead of
better
me
it.
flatten out the ditch, the one following me now builds a deeper ditch, and you can see from there how you daisy chain that together, you'd end up with a flood.
Yeah. Yes.
Right now in the county, under the floodplain requirements, we don't allow them to mess around with anything that's already pre-existing.
Yeah. To my knowledge, we don't require any documentation of a major drainage channel on any of our submittals for development.
From the city, no, but we do require them to, I'm trying to exactly remember how we do it. I know the city engineer reviews like the plating and things like that of any potential issues.
Yes.
That would also include,
Yeah.
drainage ways, but one we've had recently that's coming to mind that has drainage issues. That one they have to have a plan of how they're gonna take care of that water.
Yeah, there's an existing drainage map and then a proposed drainage map that
Right.
gets submitted with the civil plans.
Right, yes.
But I don't know that I've seen one that goes 1,000 acres to determine what the main channels
Right,
are.
and I don't know that they do or don't, to be honest with you. They probably should, given that that's actually in city code, but, so that may be something we'll have to revisit, but, but for this one, we can do that, or we could, if we're having trouble digesting this, we could even scale it back even more, and have just some basic language to say that essentially that the drainage has to be approved, and it can't have the water flowing faster than previous. Or if we want to continue and we like the language, but we're just,
Well, it's got that in as far as on-site stormwater management. It's got requirements, post-development runoff cannot be greater than pre-development runoff. So it's got that in the section above.
right,
Well, I just wonder too, maybe we're overthinking this, because the sentence says, it is intended by these regulations that the improvement of the primary drainage channel shall be the responsibility of the community. I would think the improvement of the drainage channel should be the responsibility of the developer.
and maybe we just change the
I mean, otherwise you're not gonna be.
community to developer.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe
So then it goes into, below that, it says the developer of the land containing a primary channel is expected to lay out design. So you could change that if you did, shall be the responsibility of the developer in the sentence, and then start off with the developer of the land containing the primary channel is expected to lay out.
Yeah, I wonder if you don't strike that whole second sentence where it's referring to community. In the very first sentence, we describe what a major drainage channel is. It serves an area of 1,000 acres or more. And then you just completely skip that and go to the developer of land containing a primary channel is expected to lay out, design, and plan and carry out his improvements to not interfere with that. Like, leave the whole community thing out of it.
Shane, I kind of agree with you there, other than maybe having some reference to because by the nature of this board, you're looking at some rural area, fairly rural areas. And I think there's some benefit to referencing that the beneficiaries of that drainage channel or whatever are greater than that area that's being developed.
Yes.
And sort of a recognition that this is more than just the area being developed, but otherwise, I think that's probably the right answer, is striking the majority of that second sentence and just starting with the developer. But leaving some language in there that recognizes that the beneficiaries of whatever work goes on,
Yes.
or those that are being affected, or
Yeah.
may lie outside
Yeah.
of the developed area,
I do agree.
either upstream, downstream,
yeah.
or otherwise.
It gives a little merit to what a drainage channel actually serves
Right.
versus, I like that too, yeah.
So in the document, is there a definition of primary channel?
Yeah, the very first sentence of this tells you what the primary channel is. I think the very first sentence of the paragraph is the definition, if I'm reading that correctly.
Which, of section 1.6? Or am I at the wrong?
Be 2.2C.
Okay.
So in that paragraph we've been looking at.
I see where it talks about it, I just don't see definition of it. Typically, you talk about drainage channels in terms of flow or something of that nature.
I don't know, you're getting out of my wheelhouse.
Yeah, that's what I see, because I'm just, from the experience I've seen out there, if we're not careful, and we don't describe what exactly a primary channel is or secondary or anything like that, they're gonna take liberties with remodifying them unless we got a way to tell them no. At this point, the only way I've got to tell them no is I involve the Corps of Engineers and they tell them no. We've had an issue with this, for example, at one site that's Chuckawall Creek, out there at Wilson Acres area, the new development out there, the one right across the street. They came in, they remodified the ditch, took it down, took a 90 and took another 90, which it didn't originally do. But it was all done without telling us anything. And now we've got a danger of the corners washing out on that by the flow, because the water, when it hits an inch or better an hour, the flow out of that is terrible.
But I think these regulations we're trying to put in place would help amend that sort of thing.
But being he's at the headwater, at the head end of the thing where it starts, he's already affected that entire creek for the entire duration.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I
So
don't
it's
think
gonna be
there's a-
tough, where you got grandfathered in pieces and parts. How do you get all that to be cohesive?
I don't think, this is not my world of legal, but, I don't think you can do anything about what's been done before the regulations were in place. Would be my layman's logical thought.
That's the issue the county is in right now, is that we find they flood existing architecture or existing homes by what they ended up doing.
Yeah,
And it's because probably the original development didn't take a lot of this into consideration, so they didn't have adequate drainage for that. But when you add the secondary development, now you got really a problem. So if we're only gonna tell the secondary one to do his job, the primary, the one that's been there first, is probably gonna take it, gonna end up flooding. Because they won't have the ability to dissipate the water.
yeah, but this goes back to you can't discharge water any faster than it was originally. So,
That was assuming that the regulations were followed in the very beginning.
yeah, but that's why we're putting the regulations
And I
Correct.
don't know I don't know if by having a primary channel, if what you're talking about would actually be considered a primary channel.
Right.
Right, because a primary channel is typically gonna be typically a wider channel or a more, not just a
Yeah,
ditch.
it's not
right?
gonna be
It may not be a primary
cul-
channel, is the way
yeah.
I understand it.
Yeah, just a drainage or an erosion spot in the ground. It's typically a bigger area.
I mean, it does say in section 1.6 in drainage, it says all subdivisions of land and all improvements of any character which affect drainage in any portion of the 3-mile buffer shall be subject to the provisions of these regulations and be subject to approval by the regional planning commission or their designee. So any development has got to comply with these.
Correct.
But that's going forward, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct.
It can't be anything it's just like with what we talked about in the municipal planning commission, where if there's already something in play. Now, I mean, there might be some grandfather clauses that you could throw in there saying, for example, we have one saying that if it's non-conforming, so if it's vacant for 6 months, it's probably a really bad example, but if it's vacant for 6 months, it's gotta go back and be brought to current regulation. There might be some grandfathering saying, this is okay until some triggering mechanism.
I believe the
But
one
I'm
thing
the
you're
legal
gonna
counsel.
encounter in the county is the ditches were adequate for the development that was there, that when they start subsequently adding more and more, the ditches aren't anywhere near adequate. So who's in charge of digging them out or redefining them?
Well, that's on the part of the developer inside the city.
So is the ditch considered part of an easement that gives them the latitude to create that bigger ditch?
Yes. According to the civil engineering documents, the ditches and the entryways and the culverts and all that are part of the development plan.
That'll be an interesting one to do. I'm already encountering that where they're not adequate ditches, they're not adequate culverts, because now more and more water's being dumped into the system.
Yeah. 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 And that's where those area drainage maps that are part of the civil packages,
Be nice,
they
yes.
extend beyond the boundaries of the particular development. So, I mean, they're looking at that kind of.
There's language in here that talks about that,
Yeah.
that they have to go beyond their project to.
So yeah, the first development on a country road that ends up with a 36-inch tin horn underneath it, people are probably gonna think that's exorbitant, but when we look at the regional or the area drainage map, it's understandable. So, I don't know.
But I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but what happens if you come in your development, you're upstream from an existing development that's been there 20 years. They put in 12-inch tin horns all the way through there. Obviously, that's not gonna carry the water flow. Is the new development gotta go back and replace all the old development's tin horns?
No,
So who changes them?
Well, that goes back to
that goes
post.
back to our discharge rate.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't discharge faster than it was discharging originally. I mean, we can't send an extra 5,000 gallons an hour down the ditch if it wasn't that way before.
I think in real life, you'll find that's not gonna be able to be maintained in the county.
If the engineering's done properly and the build's done properly, there'll be retention ponds and things
Yeah,
like that.
that's where your retention
that
ponds
flow
and,
from-
and blocks and all that come into play. It's
Now,
just like-
where you could have the problem is if this is the 3-mile line and then you have a developer 2 miles or a mile down the road, put in something, that's where we could have that problem.
Sure.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I agree, yeah.
Okay.
Are we out of section 1 yet?
So, any thoughts on, did we get anywhere earlier in our discussion on, well, go back to the first one there, the equitable apportion, the cost of improvements in that 1.6, and it goes along with these others. Do we have I hate to point out a problem and not have an answer to this. That's where I find myself. I don't know what the right language is there.
So on that 1.6 that you're talking about, where it said the, to equitably apportionment the cost of improvement, we could just strike that out if we wanted to. I don't know if legal has any other opinion on that. But if we're not gonna be able to define it or understand it, then we probably don't need to try to enforce it.
Being I don't know the city requirements, but the thing that we're being faced with today is not the 100-year flood. That's a bogus measurement that doesn't exist. You need to have a flow of an inch an hour, 2 inches an hour, whatever you want to pick it as. The 100-year flood doesn't exist. If so, we'd all be 400 years old here, because it supposedly Texoma doesn't flood but every 100 years.
I agree to scratch the apportionment part
Okay.
in section 1.61.
How about that section C that we were in, 1.6C?
I like Tom's recommendation of taking out that second sentence, but maybe adding to the first sentence of, you know, since the whole community is materially benefited, I mean, I think it's important to note that the primary channels serve the community, however we want to language that. That's terrible English. However we want to language that, however we want to state that. Yeah, sorry. But I think scratching the part about the responsibility of the community.
So we could put, just a thought, it is intended that channels are designated as primary channels serve a drainage area of 1,000 acres or more.
And serve the community
since-
as a whole. or-
Since this will serve the whole community as a whole, or since it will, hold on, where'd I go? Or more, since the whole community is benefited. So we're just deleting a good chunk of that and then leaving that last bit.
Yeah, there you go.
And then start with the developer.
This language on the drainage, did it come out of our city ordinances?
It did.
Okay.
It did.
Make a little note back, make a little note
Yeah,
back here somewhere.
I just wonder.
Most of this did come out of our
Okay.
city ordinances. It was just amended.
So are
Somewhat.
we happy with that amendment to that 1.6C?
I'm happy.
Okay. Over, I've got on, just turn the page there, over to item 4A. Talks about the channels located within subdivisions. So 4A, all land having an elevation below 50-year maximum flood elevation and not protected by levees or dikes shall be dedicated to the county for purposes of providing drainage in public park and utility easement use. Developer may retain unto himself or herself an easement for landscaping, for installation of maintenance, ornamental elements, and fencing, access, proper maintenance. So I guess I was just pointing out the fact that we have a developer come in. It says that if they have anything in that meets that elevation, they are required to deed it to the county, and then the county is then going to be required to take care of it.
Correct.
So I just want to bring that up, that I don't know if that's growth. Everybody likes growth.
It won't
huh?
happen. We don't own any land at all in the county, and we work real hard to get rid of everything we do own. The county is not designed to be a holder of land. The county is basically the custodian of the land. to get it before it gets sold or incorporated into a municipality.
Yeah.
I'm just, it's triggering some responsibility.
Well, yeah, I mean, and the simple thing may be to say it may be dedicated to the county. But if the county declines it, then, I don't know.
You can deed something to somebody without their permission. That's the problem.
It happens all the time, but they turn around and put it on the auction block the next year.
Any thoughts on that one?
To me, that's an incorporated city element. That's where you guys have green belts and what have you. There's nothing like that in the county.
Is that where you say, hey, this HOA has to be established to maintain it?
Yeah, if there's something like that in a neighborhood, then they have to establish the provisions to maintain it.
There you go.
You guys can do whatever you want. I think this is, just because there's not, doesn't mean there can't be. But there may not be a good reason to do that, but this is, I mean, that's the whole point of this board is you guys are sort of feeling things out, and just because there's not something, doesn't mean there can't be. This is a transition between city and county. So if dedicating something to the county is something that, you know, you guys want to keep in place, it could be done, because I think it's contemplated that this belt, this 3-mile belt, is at some point going to be, at least stands a good chance of being annexed into the city. And this is sort of a, you know, preparation for that. So maybe the county doesn't want that, and I don't think the county should be forced to take something that it doesn't want, but they're.
Well, we don't even have the mechanisms to handle it. We'd
Or
have to-
could you just word this to say, may be deeded to the county or must be maintained by the developer? Something to that effect.
Or his designated association.
Well, yeah, or, yeah, whatever he is, I mean, but it must be maintained for a period of,
Because the other thing you have on your stormwater thing, you guys mentioned you like retention ponds. Somebody better be maintaining those things.
yeah, unfortunately, that doesn't happen.
Doesn't even happen where you have controls to maintain them.
Yeah.
That's why I don't like retention ponds.
If you live downstream from one, you might like them.
Until the silly dam breaks.
Yeah.
That's the problem you run into, is we gotta also write regulations to manage the ponds as far as how they'll be managed, how they're gonna have to be inspected, otherwise they degrade real fast.
But it even talks about it back in 4 there, right above it, all primary drainage channels which are located within or immediately adjacent to an improvement or a subdivision shall be protected by. So yeah, I don't know if it gets into even saying, hey, your land's next to this improvement and it's below this certain elevation, you need to, I don't know that it says that or not, but.
When it says 50-year floodplain max or flood, what is that referencing? In the floodplain world, they've got a basically flood level that they reference. And from there you set it's a +1, +2 type elevation. This is referencing 50-year flood, 100-year flood. Who's establishing that?
FEMA.
But do they publish it? I haven't seen it.
Yes,
So what's the basic flood level?
Depends on where you are.
yeah, there's no one flood area, that's why they have different flood zones. And then within that area, they have what's considered the 100-year floodplain, 50-year floodplain, 25-year floodplain, and that's all published on FEMA. Now it's generally not the most up-to-date maps, but
Okay.
just FEMA's just slow at updating them.
But they are what we have to engineer from.
Correct,
So, I mean,
exactly.
even if the map is 25 years old, that's what we
Yes,
have to engineer from, so.
exactly.
Any other thoughts?
I don't know, I mean, my thought after hearing what Tom said, you know, and thinking about, just because it doesn't exist now, doesn't mean it can't. I mean, you know, dedicating something to the county may be,
So can we say that, I mean, it says that it will, shall be dedicated to the county. So if we just took to the county out and say it shall be dedicated for the purpose of providing drainage in public park and like it's, I don't know if that would help or work or,
Or more just set aside rather than,
I almost wonder if we'd run into a situation where then the question is, well, who's gonna take care of it? Where's it gonna be dedicated to? Public park obviously means the public's on some level, like whether it's county or whatever,
yeah.
will take care of it. I mean, we can do, where we change it to may, and then also include saying the areas must be maintained by developer, homeowner association, whatever avenue. I mean, that's a possibility, I would think.
I just think once the developer sells out, then
They're
they
history.
move to Florida, you're not gonna get.
It's not like we get large corporations coming in here building, it's usually mom and pops. So once they get one or two neighborhoods under their belt, they're out of here.
sure. The whole point of this, I think the whole point of this board and this project, if you will, is it will be an enhanced sort of responsibility of the county in that area. I mean, it's not gonna be business.
We don't have a parks department. We have no way in the world to maintain them.
Well, I'm not saying
yeah.
that you should have a parks department or that this is even the proper thing
Yeah.
for this particular area, but if this regional planning commission is going to be effective, it's going to impose additional burdens on the county in that 3-mile area.
But the county will not assume them.
By law, this board can
No, they can't.
impose them.
Now we need to clarify it, or we're gonna end up where we can't get through it.
I mean, this board has some statutory authority, but it can't be business as usual in that 3-mile zone, or there's really no reason to have it.
There's no county in Oklahoma that has a parks department, so you're saying we'll establish the first and only?
You could, do it. Somebody will.
If we have the income to do it.
I'm not saying that you have to, I'm just saying if the intent is to be business as usual in the 3-mile area on behalf of the county, then this isn't gonna be particularly.
But the county's not gonna be the one to assume the burden on this whole thing.
It'll be up to this board.
No?
So I think there's a retention pond, it's where mostly it comes up is a retention pond, probably is maintaining those ponds.
Yeah.
And that may be where you encourage the developer to create an association within that
I mean, this
community.
board could do that.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean all of the increased responsibility in the 3-mile area is on the county. It could be on the developers as this board determines.
Was that it reads that the developer may maintain that, or he may establish a association to maintain that. I mean, I think that it's just, you just need to make it aware from the developer, once he retains it, those homeowners maybe put on notice that they need to establish and maintain that. And it wouldn't be on the county.
yeah, I mean, they're not gonna be able to develop a piece of property that's in a flood zone or primary channel. I mean, I shouldn't say not be able to, could, but, I mean,
At this
I
point,
do
though,
think
we
we
don't
don't-
allow them to vote or to go anywhere near a flood, or in a flood zone of any type. Any dwelling that has people that occupy it are not allowed down into a floodplain area at all.
and that's a county requirement?
Yes.
And how do you enforce that?
we use FEMA's floodplain ordinances.
Okay.
So we don't build when they get close enough to one of the rivers or one of the high tributaries that are out there, we don't let them get near it. And as I understand it, and you may know more than I do on this, is that the floodplain administrator has the authority to basically red tag the development and just shut them down right there on the spot.
Yes, I don't think it would be able to get that far, because if you're encroaching in a FEMA designated flood zone, it has to go through them to have any modifications done.
Right.
So,
And I think actually the Corps of Engineers will be involved long before that happens.
correct. All right, I'm lost at where we were.
We're at the same place, I think.
Here was my general take on the whole thing, that this was a vast improvement over having nothing. So, I mean, I'm not saying don't modify some of these things like Kevin is pointing out, but to get something established, this is obviously light years ahead of what is there. So, in my mind, it was a vast improvement that could start being used.
And I don't disagree with that. I agree.
Yeah.
I was only bringing it
But I
up
do
to.
agree that some of these things that are in here are some anomalies that probably need to be looked at a little further.
But could they not be looked at as we go along? I mean, we could sit here the rest of our life and nitpick every little bit of this. I mean, how many
Right.
months have we been trying to get this thing done?
If you let the perfect become the enemy of the
Yeah.
good, you'll never
Yes.
get there.
Yes,
Can I make a recommendation?
of course.
And I made a recommendation a long time ago to do this, and that is we put a subcommittee together where we have county and city representatives, one or two people. They create a baseline and work through all these anomalies, then bring you back something that then you can discuss about what you can do with it. As long as there's 5 of us up here, we're all gonna be talking about different things.
Man, you wanna bird dog that?
I don't have a problem with that. I'd like to go through and redline it and say this is what we've got. Somebody on the opposing side say, no, this is what we'll do.
Well, I think that was the purpose of this, kinda like what Kevin's doing. Is to mark it up and give these comments so that we can modify these things.
I didn't know if we get this in place and we have development get filed, they come in, we do have something on the books.
That was my thought.
Just like with our last one.
Right.
If we don't have it and they file it, they don't have to abide by it. And if we do have it on file and or we do have it in place and they file, do we just say, hey, we're gonna strike that, for your
And
development?
you could always issue let's use this one as an example, this deeding a piece of property to the county. You could always give them a variance to not have to abide by that. I mean, they've gotta do all these other things, but you don't have to deed that
Well,
acre and a half to the
Let
county.
me give you an example of how this is working. This is working right now. If you build a development, the roads that are within that development, as a county, we do not have to accept them. And there's a lot of developments out there that don't have accepted roads, and somebody better figure out how to drive their own tractor. Because they're substandard or they're not built correctly.
Ron, repeat that. I'm sorry, I missed what you said.
I said, we've got developments that are in place or being built where the roads that they put in are not being accepted by the county to maintain. So the developments, once that developer's gone, that road is gonna be considered a private road and someone's gonna have to maintain it. Joseph has an example of that. He built a neighborhood. The roads didn't make spec, but he walked away from it, and now you got neighbors out there that are not happy.
Do you have a published spec?
Yeah,
Yeah?
and that's in that first package I sent.
So there's no way for a county to stop a development?
No. And that's what I was gonna ask, is how does this work? How do we enforce anything? I can't even force these guys to bring me plats. I've had half a dozen neighborhoods started well, where the roads are cut, and they're already starting to lay out pads. And I didn't see the pad, I just happened to accidentally stumble onto the place.
Ryan, it sounds like you're saying this is not gonna work. Is that what you're
I
saying?
just don't, I'm looking for the enforcement mechanism. In a city environment, you're incorporated city, you've got utilities. If someone doesn't play by the rules, you shut the utility, you don't allow them water, sewage, or whatever. In the county, you're not gonna have luxury to any of that.
So,
They still have to have an address.
again, I'm
Huh?
not,
They still have to have an address, and they still have to have OG&E to turn on the electricity or whomever.
But we can't, from what I understand, we cannot withhold 911 addresses. At least that's what I've understood from the 911 authority.
I'm no legal counsel by any means, not even pretend to be one. But, I mean, I'm looking at this from a municipal standpoint. If some developer decides they're not going to follow the City of Durant ordinances, the City of Durant would most likely file suit against that developer. Why would the county not do the same thing?
No, and I'm gonna look to my DAs, and we've had this come up before.
Yeah.
And according to, it wasn't Whitney, but Tim, I was told that my only enforcement was, well, just don't maintain the roads for them. Well, that's not much of an enforcement or an incentive.
Yeah, it's kind of like ducking your head in the sand.
So I'll let her if she can expand on this.
So that's why I'm here tonight. I'm actually here in my official job capacity. So right now, there's not any county zoning that exists. There's no plans that have been put together. The county could set up some things, but by the statutes, they're a little wonky if you look at the county statutes. Typically, they're meant for bigger counties with larger populations. So they're anticipating 200,000 plus people in a county and how to plan for that, not a county with 55,000 people. So that's part of the issue. There certainly is a mechanism to set it up, but it doesn't exist right now. So right now, it is a free-for-all. Whatever happens in county property, there's no enforcement for it. There's nothing there to keep for the county to intercede to say, hey, you're not meeting our standards, because we don't actually have any standards as a county. The issue, and Ron and I kind of discussed this, the issue when it comes to this board is that this board has some enforcement mechanisms, but it's still very limited what this board has the power to do. And even with some of the enforcement mechanisms that it has, it becomes a question of who's going to actually enforce those enforcement mechanisms. So you guys are looking at a range. If a developer does not abide by the planning commission, by the regional planning commission, we've got another issue that's running around there that I'll tell you in just a second, but if a developer does not abide by it, by statute, you're looking at somewhere, which this plan doesn't have any enforcement specified at all, so there's no, what are you gonna do to them? I mean, if they don't meet the standards, there's absolutely nothing in your plan to say this is the punishment that you're gonna face. By statute, you're limited to a fine between $100 and $1,000, or you can do county jail time, but there's kind of a flip about that. The fine, not a big deal. That's enforceable. I think that you may end up having to file lawsuits in the district court to enforce the fine, because if your alternative is to put a lien on the property, put something, so basically it's not gonna clear title, but you're gonna have a whole bunch of lawsuits coming in where people are trying to clear that title off at some point. So that's one issue that you're gonna have. If you're getting into any kind of jail time situation, that starts invoking people's rights to jury trials, and that is a whole nother mess. Is that gonna be the City of Durant's attorney that's gonna prosecute those? Is that gonna be the county attorney? That's gonna get ugly real fast. So before y'all get real excited about doing anything, y'all need to be answering those questions about how are we gonna do enforcement and what enforcement are we genuinely looking at doing here. The other part about it is, we're looking at the regional planning commission. Well, the county's also got a whole nother set of statutes that it's gotta look at in terms of planning commissions and how it's tied into this. So it's not just Ron coming to the board and agreeing to this plan. He's gonna have to take this back and have some kind of affirmative plan from the whole county commissioners before the county commissioners are bound into anything with this board. So you've got a whole bunch of issues running around there that a lot of this is statutory. So a lot of it, not a big deal. I mean, it fits within the statutory scheme that's set up in that regional planning commission, but you've got a whole bunch of side issues that are not addressed yet that the county at least is definitely gonna be concerned about, and I think the board as a whole should probably be concerned about.
So Whitney, do you have any suggestions on how to rectify those?
So, I mean, this is one of those areas, you know, Tom has looked at one set of statutes. I don't know if Tom has looked at the county statutes in terms of zoning and what has to be done. And it's actually a totally different term that they're using in the separate set of statutes, but it's basically the same ideology. It's the same general concept of this cooperative plan. I have not talked to Tom about specifically the enforcement issues at this point or what the board may or may not want to do. Even the Regional Planning Commission, to the extent that the statute says anything about who controls it or who does anything with it, the only real reference that it gives is that funds can be appropriated from the county to fund things that the board needs to do. So that's kind of a mess, and I think that there does genuinely need to be some kind of conversation between the city and the county about who is going to take on that responsibility and who's gonna be in charge of that.
I think that's been my question from the get-go.
That's one of the better explanations we've heard in the last 6 months on this, so thank you.
You should have been here 6 months ago.
I was trying real hard to stay out of a conflict.
So from my perception, you know, just to continue on that point, is I certainly don't feel I have the expertise or legal expertise, you know, to contribute to that conversation. Have you identified who those players need to be?
Truthfully, no, because this is a pretty new area. It's not that regional planning commissions don't exist, but most of them don't take on any enforcement capacity. It's purely advisory to their different people that they're answering to. So, you know, they're giving the recommendations to the city, they're giving the recommendations to the county, but then it's kind of up to the two entities to what extent they want to work together to make that happen and to make it work. Frankly, it's not tested. I mean, this is one of those things that we don't have a lot of court cases. We don't have much in the way of giving us answers. If you look at the statutes for the regional planning commissions, no case law in the state of Oklahoma, very few attorney general opinions. There's basically one attorney general opinion that applies. If you look at the county zoning and, you know, their approach, there's a lot more in terms of attorney general opinions. There's not a lot of case law. So from a legal standpoint, that makes us really nervous when we don't see cases, because it's hard to give you advice about how this is going to play out, because basically it's telling you guys, hey, when y'all make a mistake, we'll take it up to the next court and then we'll find out how wrong we were when we did it this way. And that's what we're looking at. So
it sounds like this may still be a question of scope.
definitely.
So who are the right people to answer what even scope should be?
Well, definitely your attorney. I mean, your attorneys are going to need to be involved. I mean, this is a situation where truthfully, Tom is going to have to sit down with some direction from the mayor, from the city council about what they want their responsibilities to be. The county commissioners are going to have to sit down, probably even higher than me, probably going all the way up to Tim, and sit down with what our responsibilities are going to be, who's going to do what, and then the two groups need to have some kind of meeting together to discuss, hey, this is what we're willing to put into this project. These are our limits, these aren't.
So from my perspective, if this is something that city council has authorized as a commission, you know, I certainly don't feel, you know, empowered to, you know, state what the scope or desire, you know, should be or is wanted to be. You know, I think we're caught in this circular reference. I mean, we're addressing the same questions we had the very first meeting.
Yeah.
You know, so to Ron's point about a task force, you know, I don't know if it's a subcommittee of this, you know, commission, but I do think he's on target in the sense that, you know, if this is going to happen, if you know, there are you know, a group of people who want this to happen, you know, those folks are going to have to get together and figure out what scope is going to be. Otherwise, we're going to continue. We're going to continue to drain ourselves of time and energy.
Right.
If that doesn't take place, in my opinion.
Whitney, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that the commissioners do not have to vote on this. This is strictly a state statute. It has nothing to, the commissioners are not involved in this at all, is my understanding.
That's oversimplified. I
So,
believe.
yes and no. The board can exist without the commissioners technically being involved. You are required to invite the chairman of the county commissioners to participate in the board. They are considered a member of the board whether they show up and vote or not. But the question becomes, if they're not participating and they're not ratifying what this board is doing, how much enforcement power do you have? And my guess is gonna be probably very little. So that would be my concern, is that you may not have much in the way of enforcement power beyond this board just existing and giving you recommendations, but you may not be able to do anything with that if the county commissioners are not involved in also ratifying this. Sure.
I think that's been my concern all along. There has to be a meeting between the two groups if this is gonna work. There is, as far as I understand the statutes, even with the statute that we're using, you can't take the power away from a county because you're a city. And what you're asking for is to take the power from the county. And I don't think that works. You're working on a Title 11, we're working on Title 19, and from what I can see, never does a plain meet.
It sounds to me like that part should have been settled the very first meeting, not a year down the road, you know, I mean,
Well, I think we had, and I won't say bad guidance, but I think we had aggressive guidance in the very beginning. I don't think, I didn't have representation here, so I had no way to argue the case. That's why I asked Whitney to stick by, because she's gone through this with me. And don't get me wrong, as a county, I would like to see something that's implemented. But if we just implement a set of rules without the capability of enforcement, it's kind of like threatening your kids. They're not going to change. They're going to continue to do whatever they've always done.
So,
would it be possible to table this and have a special meeting? I mean, right now, we're meeting, I guess, monthly.
I wonder if it wouldn't be beneficial to table this until city admin and their legal can meet with county admin and their legal to figure out
I
how
agree.
this will work. Because otherwise, we're just doing,
The dance.
even if we were to instill this, we're gonna have developers come in here and do a dog and pony show, knowing good and well they're not gonna do what they just proposed.
To add to that point, we're going around circle, circle.
That, exactly.
I would,
And our very first meeting, we asked, what is the scope and what's the enforcement? We're 6 months, however many months down the road, we're asking the same thing. This commission cannot determine that.
no, I think we need to get the attorneys for both the county and the city together, and a representative, myself or whoever on the county, and then someone, mayor or whoever on the city. And let's sit down and establish the game rules, what it is, and see if there's buy-in from either side. Because I don't think, Whitney, correct me, I don't think there's clear-cut jurisdiction. Just because these statutes exist, the city can't come in and just say, hey, we're gonna do it whether you like it or not.
In my opinion, no, they can't. But that's my opinion, that's my reading
Well,
with both sets of statutes.
And from the county standpoint, we're gonna take her opinion. That means we'll end up in court before somebody fighting each other, and we'll be another 6 months down the road or longer. If we can truncate this and
Well,
go to a task force.
It's apparent there's conflict already,
Yeah,
so my opinion is make the efforts to resolve conflict now.
so I'd like to make a motion that we form a task force of the appropriate skill sets, and let's figure out what the top side looks like first.
Well, Ron, do we really need another committee?
No,
We got-
not another committee, just the experts to sit down around the table.
Well, that's what, that would be the attorneys.
Yeah, but if we don't get the attorneys together, we're not gonna, until she has the ability to argue or to do whatever in front of Tom, We've got two different sets of opinions. We've got to get it hammered out. And none of us at this desk has got the attorney or the legal skills to do it.
Ron, this is just my opinion, but I think the term task force or committee, I think is probably not what we need.
Okay.
You know, to the mayors, I think it's the terminology task force. We don't need another subcommittee. You know, but, you know, the informed people need to.
Due
need to meet.
diligence, whatever we want to call the silly thing.
Well, also, we can't, I don't know what motion we would make, but we can't make a motion that's not on the agenda.
Well, we could, is this the only thing on our agenda?
It is.
It is. I mean, couldn't we just
You
take
could-
no action on this until,
Can we not table this agenda item until
But
these
if-
actions have been,
but if you table, you
have
have
to
to
have a
set
date
another
certain.
date.
you're right.
Yeah.
So you could take no action and then request that the two attorneys, the city and the county attorney, get together. And then if you guys want anybody else involved in that, then that needs to be probably stated as well. And then, but taking no action, you can do that. And you can sit there and just request the powers that be that you want. And you be specific about who you want to be in there, because then then they know who you want to hear from.
But to the mayor's point, it wouldn't be an action, I mean, it would just be a, recommendation maybe, or, since it's not on the agenda, is that what, am I understanding you right? We can't make a motion that they
I
meet.
wish this thing wasn't here. You talked louder. Here
We-
you go, I'm sorry.
We can't, you're saying we can't make a motion that they meet, but
Right.
we can recommend? Can we okay. So what are we gonna do on this one? Item 3A. Do we have a motion on it?
I make a motion that we take no action.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Call for a vote, please.
I have to wake this thing back up.
Is it supposed to pop up?
It will, yes.
Oh, okay.
So yes, yes means no. So under new business. Okay.
Did I write that right? You said
We'll see.
15 no's.
We'll see.
Take no action, I said
Say-
yes, no action.
Yeah, it looks like it. It's all green, so it must be good then if it's all green. Okay, new business. Is that where we have a recommendation for the, who wants to eloquently state that recommendation?
You're the one with the worst.
Eloquent is a big word for me to use, but,
Let me.
I would like to recommend that the council for the city and the county have their own meeting to determine how we can enforce this, so that we understand the scope of what this board or this commission is capable of.
Whitney, is there some verbiage we need to put in here to make this thing happen? You're a legal scholar.
No, not particularly.
Okay.
All right, we have that recommendation. We have a motion to adjourn.
I'll move to adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Call for a vote, please.
Sorry. Let me find the leave the meeting. Leave the meeting. Where's leave the meeting?